All right. This is going to be a topic on the right to travel. Today, we're living in a society that uses public policies to override the laws that have already existed here, that clearly state what our rights are to travel. Now, before I get into this right to travel, I need to explain one thing. If you have not taken previous proper administrative processes, if you have not taken these steps, this right to travel does not apply to you. So, my disclaimer at the beginning of this video is that you need to take your administrative processes first before you exercise your right to travel, or you will deal with some issues. You will have some problems. Now, to jump right into it, the first thing to understand about your right to travel is that you've given up your right to travel by entering into a contract with a private company in whatever state you're in. Now, I'm going to speak specifically about California because that's where I'm from, that's what I'm familiar with, that's what I've studied on. I'm sure every state is very similar, yet has its own variations of its policies, procedures, statutes, as well as their departments of motor vehicles. Now, understand, in California it's called the DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles. Okay, now as we're jumping into this, keep in mind that everything that I'm speaking to you with right now, though it sounds like English, is in legalese. Now, legalese is a video that I'll have to do at a later time, but for those of you who have a Black's Law dictionary, you should easily be able to understand what I'm saying to you today. So, the first thing to talk about after we talk about the aforementioned, you've entered into a contract with a private company and therefore you have to be held liable for that contract. The second thing is that you also, through tacit acquiescence or otherwise, have agreed to be a citizen. Now, when you agree to be a citizen, effectively what you've done is you've gotten rid of your freedom as a live flesh and blood free person. Okay, now when we're talking about the right to travel, we're speaking specifically about those individuals who have taken their administrative processes and also are a free person. Now, when I say motor vehicle, specifically in the terms that is outlined in the Department of Motor Vehicles, is exactly what it is, which is separate from a private conveyance. Okay, this is also separate from other terms and definitions that are used to explain your mode of transportation. Now, when we're doing the right to travel, what we have to understand is that you are in your private conveyance. Okay, it's private property. That's why it's important for you to file your UCC forms and to put all of this property in those forms, and to make sure that you have clarified and done your affidavits to clarify to the state that you are traveling upon the common way in your private conveyance. Okay, now that right there, what I just said to you, that's the key, that's the golden nugget, and it's really that simple. Everything else is just the fluff and the deprogramming that you've been accustomed to all of these years. Now, when you're traveling on the common way, which is any public street, with the exception of freeways. Now, we're not going to talk about freeways at this moment. That's a different issue, and it depends on the state actually. But generally, anywhere on the street that you're traveling, you don't have to have a driver's license. You don't have to pay registration. You don't have to do any of that. Those are far-reaching taxations based upon statutes and public policies. I'm going to read to you something briefly here that I think is important. And this right here, you can look this up yourself. I always say, dig out thine own salvation with fear and trembling of the Lord. Okay, now listen to this right here. Okay, if ever a judge understood the public's right to use the public roads, it was Justice Tolman of the Supreme Court of the state of Washington. Justice Tolman stated, now this is a quote of him in a courtroom, "Complete freedom of the highways is so old and well established a blessing that we have forgotten the days of the robber barons and toll roads, and yet, under an act like this, arbitrarily administered, the highways may be completely monopolized. If, through the lack of interest, the people submit, then they may look to see the most sacred of their liberties taken from them one, by more or less rapid encroachment." Now this was in a case, Robertson versus the Department of Public Works, 180 Washington 133147. You can go look this up yourself. Now, that is a very prophetic ringing in my ears, I'll tell you that. This was a while ago when he stated this. Now, understanding that the most sacred of liberties, of which Tolman spoke of, was your personal liberty. The definition of personal liberty is personal liberty, okay, or the right to enjoyment of life and liberty, is one of the fundamental and natural rights which are inalienable, that we are born with, okay? This is what you give up when you agree to be a citizen of a de facto co-government that we are under right now, which goes back to the Federal Reserve Act and the institution of the Social Security Act, which Woodrow Wilson spoke of. Now, I don't want to go there yet, but all of these things are supposed to be protected, all right? Now, through passing of statutes and the institution of public policies, all of these things are going away. Your right to travel, your right to own private property as a conveyance and not have to be taxed to use your own private property. Now, here's what you have to do when I say I'm traveling on the public way in my private conveyance. This is what you say when you get pulled over by a police officer when you're doing just that. The police officer, you be respectful to him and you speak to him very respectfully, but make sure that you speak to him in terms of legalese, okay? You don't argue with the officer, and most and foremost, you don't really even answer any of his questions. You ask him questions, okay? What is the stop for? Was there a crime committed? Am I free to go? Why were the lights on? What is the emergency? Well, according to everything that I've read within the bounds of the law, anybody using a light had better well have an emergency going on. And if there is no emergency, well, that person has just now committed a felony. Now, if this person does this under the color of law, that felony turns into treason. However, we won't go there at this time. So understand that you have to clarify that you are in your private conveyance and that you are traveling. You are not driving, and your private conveyance is not a vehicle, okay? It's not a vehicle. It's private conveyance. That's what it is. You can call it an automobile if you want to, but if you say, I can drive this vehicle without a license or registration because it's my right to travel, well, what you just did is you just incriminated yourself, and you just put yourself under an admiralty law jurisdiction and a contract law that apparently you didn't have any idea about. So you deregister your vehicle, but it doesn't stop there. You send your affidavits in to your Secretary of State, and make sure that you put on there, notice to agent is notice to principal, notice to principal is notice to agent. This means the Secretary of State, who is the boss of every sheriff department, police officer, and whatnot, that Secretary of State has now been notified that you are in your private conveyance and you are exercising your right to travel, and that you are not transporting goods or persons for monetary income or for financial gain, because then that would be considered driving, okay? Taxi cabs drive, bus drivers drive, okay? A person going to the supermarket to get groceries for their kids or to a hospital because they're sick is traveling, okay? They're traveling. Now, I'm saying this because that's realistically what they're doing. However, in the eyes of the law, if they don't clarify this, then they're considered driving. And then therefore, they have to abide by these laws and these statutes. Okay, so when you're doing your administrative process and you're filing all of your paperwork, you're going to make sure that you clarify this and that you get this on public record. Okay, so that way when you do get pulled over, and you will get pulled over, but don't panic, because the police officer, law enforcement agent, whatever, the public servant who has taken an oath of office, okay, has to uphold the Constitution and what it says in there. Now, we have a right to travel. We have a right of freedom. If we weren't allowed to travel freely, what would that be considered? Okay, if we were told that we could only go here and there under these circumstances and situations, or if we pay for it, those would be considered liberties, not freedoms. Okay, a liberty and a freedom are two separate things. This is why it's called the Statute of Liberty, not the Statute of Freedom. All right, because in this whole scenario, there is no freedom. There are only liberties according to the statutes that govern them. So, in your right to travel, maybe I got a little off topic there, but in the right to travel, what you're going to want to do is A, file your affidavit. Okay, you're going to clarify all this. You're going to send it to the Secretary of State. You're going to make a copy of it. You're going to keep it. You're going to send another copy to whatever highway patrol is in your state. We have the highway patrol. You may have the state troopers. You send them a copy of it. Okay, if in this circumstance you also have a driver's license or a permit or something from the state that you're in, from their Department of Motor Vehicles, then you have to do a recension of signature. You have to end that contract and make it null and void and rescind your signature. Okay, essentially what you're doing is you're disengaging this contract. You're ending your obligations to them. All right, most of these states have given these departments of motor vehicle registrations the right to establish these statutes that they enforce through public policy using law enforcement officers and public servants who take oaths of office. They train them to do this, that, or the other. Now, a lot of this we could change through legislation. We would have to draft a bill, submit it to the your local congressman. Once he gets qualified, it ends up going on to the November ballot, yada yada. But legislation could change this. However, that's probably not likely to happen, so I'm not going to put my chips on that. But what I will say is individually you can take the steps to avoid being taxed and improperly classified. One of the ways to take back your right to travel is paperwork. The other way to take back your right to travel is by educating yourself and knowing what to say, when to say it, how to say it. Okay, these are important things that may seem small and minor, but one little slip up, you could be gone down the wrong path. Before you know it, you're in a heap of trouble, and you think that you can get yourself out of it, but because you've put yourself in it in a way that you did not understand, which in legalese terms means agreeing to in contract terms, either verbal, written, or otherwise, implied even. So keep this in mind. The way that you speak to these public servants makes a difference. Okay, it can change your outcome to positive, negative. I'm gonna read you another little concept that I picked up that I think is probably good to insert here. Personal liberty largely consists of the right of locomotion, to go where and when one pleases, only so far restrained as the rights of others may make it necessary for the welfare of all other citizens. Now I'm going to pause there and say, this is why taxi cab drivers need a license. Bus drivers need a license. They need to be qualified to drive. Yes, they are dealing with the public and moving, transporting goods and people. So yes, you don't want to put them behind the wheel and put the public at risk. So I agree with the fact that we need these particular statutes, and that certain individuals, yes, must be qualified and licensed. Okay, so I'm not saying, hey, everybody, let's stop getting licenses and paying registration, blah, blah, blah. No, okay, that's not what I'm saying. Listen specifically. If you want to be a taxi cab driver, or you want to drive a train or a plane, you need a license. You're dealing with the public. Okay, plain and simple. So I'll continue with this little excerpt. It says, the right of the citizen to travel upon the public highways and to transport his property thereon by horse-drawn carriage, wagon, or automobile is not a mere privilege which may be permitted or prohibited at will, but the common right which he has under his right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Under this constitutional guarantee, one may therefore, under normal conditions, travel at his inclination as long as the public highways or in public, along the public highways or in public places, and while conducting himself in an orderly and decent manner, neither interfering with nor disturbing another's rights. Okay, he will be protected not only in his person but in his safe conduct. Now, this is under the first constitutional law, section 329, page 1135. So, continuing on there, because this, I can't say it any better than this. I can only help to deprogram and explain some of this, but this really says it right here. Personal liberty consists of the power of locomotion, of changing situations, of removing one's person to whatever place one's inclination may direct, without imprisonment or restraint, unless by due process of law. Now, this is Blackstone's commentary, by due process of law. This is Blackstone's commentary 134, Hare Constitution, 77, Bovier's Law Dictionary, 1914 edition. Alright, Black's Law Dictionary, 5th edition, Justice Tolman was concerned about the state prohibiting the citizen from the most sacred of his liberties, the right of movement, the right of moving oneself from place to place without threat of imprisonment, okay, the right to use the public roads in the ordinary course of life. Alright, these, I don't understand how this kind of information can easily be hidden, taken away, and slip through the annals of time right in front of our eyes as it's happening, and we sit back and either don't take action or take the wrong action. What I'm suggesting here is that everybody take their individual actions. Okay, be responsible for yourself. Now, if you personally feel that you can't govern yourself through your own volition with a clear, sound mind, using wise judgment, then here I would suggest that maybe you should go get a license and do all of that, and have somebody, keep a little bit of an eye on you, maybe give you some boundaries that you might need. So, this isn't for everybody. Plain and simple. This is really for those individuals who are making a way of life of being personally responsible for themselves. Okay? Individuals that want to exercise their freedoms and not be classified as citizens. I agree, certain people need to be citizens. Plain and simple. In my opinion, they need a babysitter. Okay, but not everybody needs a babysitter. Some people grow up. Some people know how to be responsible for themselves. So, in this right to travel issue, it's about taking personal responsibility more than it's about taking personal freedoms back. Alright? It's more than about personal liberty. Even though this whole topic largely consists of it being personal liberty, it's really personal responsibility. And you have to have the right mindset to take this personal responsibility. Now, The other thing that I'm sure a lot of you are thinking right now, well, what about license, registration, insurance? You don't need any of that? Okay, first of all, real quick, the registration, go find out where that money's going to. That's all I'm going to say on that. Follow the paper trail. Registration, registering my own private property. Am I going to go and register, my iPad? Yes. Am I going to go and pay annually every year to put a sticker on my iPad to use it? No. So certain parts of this, you have to take, and other parts you have to figure out what to remove. Like with mental, surgical fortitude, you have to be able to decide what you're going to exercise and what you're not going to exercise, which liberties you are going to govern yourself by, and which freedoms you are going to exercise. Now, as far as the insurance goes, my suggestion is, if you're deciding to exercise your right to travel and you've done all the proper steps and you legitimately are in your private conveyance and you are only traveling and not driving, okay, and you're not in a vehicle but an automobile, then you might want to think about getting some assurance. Now, what's the difference between insurance and assurance? Well, to put it as simply as possible, and this is once again where I suggest that you dig in, because this whole topic right here, it's pretty detailed and it goes a little bit more than just the right to travel. But essentially, your insurance is you are allowing somebody else to take a hit for you, but you're going to be paying constantly for it. Assurance, you essentially have, let's say you found your UCC forms, and in those UCC forms you put 100 ounces of silver, or whatever, something like that. Assurance is, I have this held somewhere like in an escrow, and if something happens, this is what, I basically a forfeit, or I use this to compensate or to whatever. So if you can't get the assurance for yourself, it's kind of sort of like, I don't know any of you who have ever had, like in California, like an SR21, I believe it's called. It's similar to what I'm speaking about, but either way, that's what you would go with. So I'm not saying drive recklessly and don't have protection for yourself or others should some incident occur. Okay, I'm not saying that you should just go out and forget everything, stick it to the man and yada yada. That's not what I'm saying, okay? What I am saying, though, is that you do these things with all due diligence, and which are most behooving to the whole purpose for you doing it, to exercise your freedom. Don't lose your freedom that you're exercising. Don't gain your freedom, exercise it, gain it just to lose it. Okay? So protect yourself and your freedoms while you're exercising them. So on the right to travel, we kind of covered a few things, and more importantly, we spoke about what needs to happen. Now, there is a lot of information that you'll be able to find on the web. You just have to do the research. You just have to do a lot of reading. And once again, personal responsibility. Me personally, I'm an info junkie. I can't stop reading. It's kind of like my secret habit. Anyway, for me, I enjoy it. But some of you may not so much. So that's why I'm putting this little video out here for you. Because this is part of a series on being a true sovereign, not a sovereign citizen. That's kind of an oxymoron right there, but if you're a sovereign citizen, go ahead, by all means, be that, and we'll see how far that gets you. So I want to also say that while you're doing these things, please use all respectful behavior and manners. Don't give the rest of us a bad name, the rest of us grown-ups a bad name, basically. If you do have an encounter with a law enforcement officer, be respectful. Remember, don't answer his questions and incriminate yourself. When he asks you a question, you ask him a question right back. It's that simple. Okay, and that can go on and on and on and on forever. Later I'll make another little video about how to handle a motor vehicle stop or an automobile stop, how to handle a law enforcement officer who is a public servant who took an oath of office. Another video that you're going to see too is about the UCC, filing your Uniform Commercial Code forms. You're going to want to have that as part of this right to travel, so it's going to be important for you guys to get those two videos too when they come out. But essentially, your right to travel is no more than paperwork, and you just have to understand the administrative processes it takes to get that. So when you finally get your right to travel, you're going to need, here's another question. What about my license plate? That's going to definitely get you pulled over if you don't have a license plate. Yeah, true, it will. And you do at some point actually want to have something on your vehicle. You can make the plate yourself, but this is what you put in the affidavit and send to the Secretary of State and to all the law enforcement agencies, because you're telling them, hey, you can identify me by this right here. This, you can, once you send that in, they should have this. Like, they can pull up all your information by running your license plate number, right? Okay, so what you're doing is you're giving them essentially something just like a license plate number to put in their little database, so when they want to be, Johnny on the spot about getting your information, boom, it's all right there. They can pull it up, it's all right there. And more than likely, if you've done these processes, the moment they pull your information up, if you've already had 1 or 2 run-ins with them and you've done your due diligence and they see it all there, more than likely they'll say, all right, have a good evening, drive safe. They may ask you a question or two. Don't drive with broken taillights. Don't drive with cracked window screens. Don't violate these very basic common sense issues that a lot of these statutes and laws were made for. Now, I don't think that the way they go about enforcing them is necessarily constitutional, yet that's what you deal with when you enter into a contract. You enter into a contract with the Department of Motor Vehicles. Essentially, you just decided to throw away all of your rights and all of your constitution to agree to a contract with a third party. That's not a government agency. So these are the important keys to remember as well for your little ammo and arsenal. I'm going to give you another little excerpt right here because I think this is a good place to put this in. When the state allows the formation of a corporation, it may control its creation by establishing guidelines or statutes for its operation and charters. Corporations who use the roads in the course of business do not use the roads in the ordinary course of life. There's a difference between a corporation and an individual. The United States Supreme Court has stated, "We are of the opinion that there is a clear distinction in this particular between an individual and a corporation, and that the latter has no right to refuse to submit its books and papers for examination on the suit of the state. The individual may stand upon his constitutional rights as a citizen. He is entitled to carry on his private business in his own way. His power to contract is unlimited. He owes no duty to the state or to his neighbors to divulge his business, all right, or to open his doors to the investigation, so far as it may tend to incriminate him. He owes no such duty to the state, since he receives nothing therefrom. Beyond the protection of his life, liberty, and property, his rights are such as the law of the land, long antecedent to the organization of the state, and can only be taken from him by due process of law and in accordance with the Constitution. Among his rights are the refusal to incriminate himself and the immunity of himself and his property from arrest or seizure except under warrant of law. He owes nothing to the public so long as he does not harass or trespass upon their rights." Okay, so This goes right along with you entering into these contracts with the state, entering into a contract with Department of Motor Vehicles, entering into a contract, third party, private citizen, whatever. You're an individual. All right. Now, in this particular excerpt, it did mention, I'll go back to it, it said that the individual may stand upon his constitutional rights as a citizen. Now, this is where you have to differentiate the use of the word citizen in legal use terms, because these things evolve and change over time. Having a Black's Law dictionary is very, very important for you guys when you're going through all of this. Okay, so if essentially you don't have to submit your paperwork and you don't have to do any of this you don't owe this obligation to anybody, if you've done nothing wrong, if you've committed no crime, you can do your private affairs as your private affairs. You don't have to submit your books or anything. This is why I'm saying, when a law enforcement officer stops you and you are traveling on the common way in your private conveyance, and starts asking you questions, this is why I'm saying you ask him questions. Okay, that's it. You don't argue with him. Okay, you don't try to explain how, I'm just driving to the store, or where they say, is this your vehicle? You don't say, yes, this is my vehicle, because you just referred to what you're in as a commercial thing in contract that is referred to in a particular way, which means that it is governed by these statutes. Okay, so if an officer says, is this your vehicle, sir? Is this your vehicle, ma'am? You say, no, this is not my vehicle. Then they'll say, whose is it? Do you have registration on this? You say, well, this is my automobile, or maybe, you don't even have to say that. If the officer says, is this your vehicle? Another response you can give to him is, what's the reason for the stop tonight? Avoid even getting into this whole discussion of semantics between it being a vehicle or an automobile. Because the fact of the matter is, most of these law enforcement officers are, I'm not saying they're stupid, ignorant, or anything, because a lot of them are extremely intelligent, and the extremely intelligent ones will understand these principles. And if you act accordingly and proper with them, then there should be no problem. I've seen many times where law enforcement officers have taken this into consideration, understand these things, and have no problem allowing them, because they do believe in the Constitution. A lot of these law enforcement officers are decent people, decent human beings. Not all of them are out there to, avoid having to get a real job or whatever. Some of them really do want to protect and serve. So when you're exercising your right to travel and you're dealing with a stop with a law enforcement officer, a public servant, and they start asking you questions, understand how you're referring to these questions, how you are answering them if you're deciding to answer them. I would prefer to just continue to ask as many questions as possible until he can do nothing, but he has to respond to your questions, right? Now, sometimes these officers aren't going to get too happy about that. They get a little ego trip, where they're going to feel like, oh, you're trying to tell me how to do my job, kind of thing. So, you really want to avoid making it seem like that. You really want to avoid coming off like that. You catch more flies with honey than vinegar. So, if a bee hive is going to release bees, if you go swatting at it, don't go swatting at the beehive, okay? You can get the honey out. You got to smoke them out. Smoke the bee out with a bunch of questions. So that's my little deal about how to deal with a stop if you're dealing with a stop. So talking about the difference between if I work for a company, or if I'm just traveling, in the due course of life, there's a difference right there. Because if you are working for, say, Pepsi, and you're driving one of their vehicles to deliver some goods or services, even, then you are driving, and you have to abide by the laws and the statutes set forth that are governing those particular descriptions. Okay, you do. I'm not saying don't in that situation. So how do you deal with that? If you want to have a job that requires you to have a light driver's license, right? It requires you to enter into a contract now with this Department of Motor Vehicles, yet you don't, want to have to deal with this in your public life. Well, you get a different class, license. That's something that you have to clarify in your affidavit. Say, I'm only governed by these during these hours and these times. So when you are traveling on the common way, this may sound backwards, but I would not carry that particular license on you. I would handle that in the sense that that is property of the company you work for, and you leave it at the job, just like you would your tools, just like you would your outfit if you're doing construction, or whatever. So you work in an auto shop and you have Cintas comes and does your uniforms. You leave it there, they clean it, they do that. You leave your tools in your toolbox at your shop. So that's how you have to understand that situation. And maybe that might be another video, I don't know, but I've never had to deal with it, but through my particular understanding of laws and statutes and the way contract law would work is that you can establish in the contract, in the affidavit of your right to travel, that and your recension of signature from the Department of Motor Vehicles, that any contract that you have with your state Department of Motor Vehicles is owned and operated by XYZ company, by Pepsi Cola or whatever. And by no means am I sponsoring them. I don't drink that garbage, and I would suggest you don't either. I'm not dissing them, in my opinion, but that's off topic. So let's say you go and you get qualified, you get your driver's license. You make sure that you put on public record and you send to the State Department, hey, this is owned by this company. So when you quit that job, essentially you quit that contract, and that contract only works while you're at a job. So you can travel on your way to work in your private conveyance, exercising your right to travel, right? Enter into your job, check in, pick up your tools and your driver's license, and go and get to work. Okay? Because having that is going to open up the doors for the company to be able to get insurance and for you to be qualified. So that's my take on how to deal with being able to have a job that requires a driver's license and still being able to exercise your right to travel. You can try to think of another way, and I would be glad to hear any suggestions, but so far I haven't really heard anybody speak on that, and that's the only thing that I could come up with. You're going to use a contract. When you sign up with the company, you're going to use your contract with the company as your buffer zone between your right to travel and having to have this driver's license. All right. Now, on the other hand, the corporation is kind of a creature of the state. So what I would say is, if you're going to get incorporated yourself and you're going to have, say I'm starting a construction company or a plumbing company and I work for myself, and you're making yourself a corporation, now in this sense it's kind of sort of to the benefit of the public, that you go and you get yourself licensed and registered and all of that, because not only are you the one that's doing the driving, but it's also you that are kind of sort of commercially liable as well. So you're kind of sort of got a double whammy going on there. Now corporations receive little special little privileges and perks and whatnot. But they're also held subject to some other laws of the state, and they're also kind of limited to whatever their charter is. You want to go S Corp, C Corp, LLC, 501c3, whatever. They kind of sort of are governed by a little bit different contracting laws. But essentially, your right to act as a corporation is really only preserved as long as it's obeying the laws that govern it, C Corp, S Corp, whatever. So keep that in mind too. If you are, say, one of these self-employed, driving commercial vehicles or whatever, you own your taxi company, or you're an Uber driver or whatever, which is popular these days. So, that's a little tidbit on how I would suggest kind of handling if you want to be an Uber driver type situation. Now, I would say you definitely want to investigate these particular corporations that you're going to create for yourself, and maybe ask an attorney or whatever if you feel the need to. I always say, dig out your own salvation with fear and trembling of the Lord. Do your own research, learn for yourself, educate yourself. But if you feel the need to go elsewhere, by all means go elsewhere, and make sure you get it right. So I guess from here I'm going to kind of sort of talk about fundamentals real quick, and then we'll kind of sort of close this up, because I think we covered a lot. It's a lot to digest right there. Ooh. But believe it or not, there's even more. So I'm going to go with this another little excerpt here, and this is all case law. So all of this can be found under case law. Based upon the fundamental ground that the sovereign state has the pecuniary control of the streets and highways in the exercise of its police power, they may absolutely prohibit the use of these streets as a place for the prosecution of private business for gain. They all recognize the fundamental distinction between the ordinary right of the citizen to use the streets in the usual way and to use the streets as a place of business, all right, or a main instrument of business for private gain. The former is a common right, the latter is an extraordinary use. As to the former, the legislative power is confined to the regulations. As to the latter, it is pecuniary and extends even to the absolute prohibition. Since the use of the streets by a common carrier in the prosecution of its business as such is not a right, but a mere license of privilege. Hadfield versus London, but not London like London, London as in Lundin, if you want to see that. 98 Washington 651 168 P516. You can Google that and it'll pull up. So I think leaving it with that kind of sort of helps to sum it up, and hopefully you guys will be able to exercise your right to travel and do it properly and accordingly within the bounds of the laws and the statutes. Okay, I'm not saying break the laws or the statutes. What I am saying is use them properly, use them accordingly. So I hope that was informative, to say the least. If anything else, I believe that this is probably one of the first steps you would be able to take to truly be sovereign and take your responsibility, because this is a pretty big issue, pretty big deal right here. This is the main vein. It's kind of sort of like the right to keep and bear arms, whole nother topic. So you guys take that and be looking out for the next video. All right, bye.